Hi, and welcome to New Moon Knitting. Today, we're talking all about my stash. Welcome back to New Moon Knitting. My name is Hillary. You can find me on Ravelry or Instagram at New Moon Knitting. And this is a very special episode of the podcast because today I am trying to get started on tackling my stash. So if you've watched my podcast before, you may have heard me talk about how I have set an intention for myself this year to really focus on prioritizing using yarn stash over buying new yarns when I start a project. That comes from kind of a larger goal I've set for myself for the year, which is to review my consumption habits across multiple categories in my life and to find areas where I might be over-consuming. So for me, overconsumption is making purchases beyond any utility. And utility doesn't have to be like some tactile functionality, something like that. It can be a little more abstract. And a really good example of this from my life is, so this is my rock collection. Some of them are a gift from my dad. He had a rock collection as a kid and he gave it to me. But some of these items I have purchased over the years, and I think they're just a really good example of the expanded definition of utility. Because these rocks don't do anything, right? I'm not using the quartz for electronics manufacturing. They just sit here and they look pretty. But in my life, they serve a real function and a real purpose because every time I walk into my office, they make me so happy. I love the way they look. I love how they remind me that I am really loved, not just by my dad, but other people in my life who have gifted me rocks for this collection. But the way that they correspond to sort of this overconsumption idea is if I'm thinking about purchasing new rocks. So for example, one of my favorite crystals is smoky quartz. It's like a dark black quartz crystal. Sometimes I'll be at a store or something and they'll have some really lovely smoky quartz pieces. And I'll think, oh, wow, I would really love to buy that smoky quartz because it's my favorite. But then I take a step back and I think, actually, I already have some really nice smoky quartz pieces. I can't really see it. I have one here, I have one here, and then I have one up there as well. And so would another piece of smoky quartz really bring me that much more joy, right? It's kind of like diminishing returns. It's probably not going to. And so I'll reevaluate if I really want to make that purchase. And so, yeah. Was this a little bit of an excuse to show you how cool my rock collection is? I don't know, maybe. But I also think it really feeds into this. It's a really good example of how you can look at utility above and beyond practicality, I guess. That segue is mostly just to say that this is a reflection of my stash and how it makes me feel. If you have more stash than me, when you look at your skeins of yarn, every single one brings you joy and you get a lot of inspiration from what you have, or you just like having it around and it makes you happy, that's great. I am not judging anybody on the amount of stash they have or don't have. This is just an experiment for me. And when I look at my stash as it exists right now, I don't have totally positive feelings about it. So sometimes I feel a little guilty because I see things that have been in there for a long time that I just haven't worked with. And I feel sort of bad for not using those yarns. Sometimes I get a little anxious because again, it's just sitting around and it's well, I really should get to these things. I should really, I've paid money for these items. I should make an attempt to actually use them. And I don't like having those negative feelings associated with one of my absolutely favorite pastimes. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take all of my yarn and I'm gonna first organize it. Then what I wanna do is I wanna make sure I have a way to track it. So I'll put together a spreadsheet where I can keep track of all of the metrics you might want to if you're looking at your yarn. So what's the yarn weight? How much do I have? What's the yardage? What's the fiber content, the name of the yarn, things like that. But there's also a couple other kind of more abstract metrics that I would like to get in this spreadsheet as well. The first is I want to try to gauge like when I purchased it. So I'm not going to go back through like receipts or anything like that, but just like looking at it, I think I have a pretty good sense. I can track down at least like the year I bought something. And so I want to kind of see like, have I had this for 6 months, a year, 2 years, or longer than that? If I can remember, I would also like to mark down a little bit of like what inspired me to purchase it in the first place. So was it on sale? Was it the color? Was it the fiber content? What initially drew me to this particular yarn? I would also like to know if it's been in there for more than like 6 months, why haven't I used it? Is it the color? Do I have a weird quantity that I don't know what to do with it? And the reason I want to collect this data is I think knowing what inspired me will help me recognize those patterns as I move forward. And then recognizing why I didn't use something will help prevent me from purchasing things that won't really serve a utility in my fiber arts experience. Once I know what I have, I will set a goal for myself on how I want to start working through it. I'm leaning towards using like a yardage, like a X yards stash down, and then I'll try to figure out kind of what's a reasonable amount to work through, and also like what's a reasonable timeline to work through it. I don't want to get to no stash. That's not really the purpose of this, but I think what I want is I want everything in my stash to make me excited to use it. So that's where I'm trying to get to, is like a smaller amount that does not make me feel overwhelmed and is full of yarn that makes me really excited to use it. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, here it is. Initial thoughts, seeing it all like this. I guess it's kind of what I expected. Like, everything here is like very familiar to me. And, but at the same time, seeing it all together and like piled up is a little overwhelming because normally it's in like a couple of different places. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna organize everything by yarn weight. And once that's done, I will give you kind of like a brief overview of what everything looks like before I add it to my database and then put it away. Okay, so I have finished going through my stash and I have organized everything by weight. So we'll start down here. So these three right here, this is all I have for bulky yarn in my stash, so it's pretty limited. Then everything else in this row, including that single ball up there, is all worsted weight yarns. It's predominantly sweater quantities, which is kind of nice because it does give me a lot more options of what I can do with it. Up next, in this next row, I have all of my DK weight yarn. At first, I was kind of surprised that this was all I had for DK because it's probably my favorite weight to work with. But then I kind of realized like, well, yeah, of course it's going to be the least amount because it's my favorite to work with, so it doesn't sit in the stash that long. But yeah, this is more of like a mix and match. I got these really nice Icelandic wools at a garage sale actually, and they are really lovely. I just haven't figured out what to do with them yet. So next up in the middle here, I have my Mohair, a mix and match of single skeins and also some larger quantities. So we'll see what I can do with those. And then the last and kind of largest chunk is all of my fingering weight yarns. Ooh, a tricky little mohair got away. But yeah, so the fingering weight, lots and lots of single skeins of fingering weight, some larger quantities, and some very large like sweater plus quantities over here. But kind of, again, a mix and match. I only have 2 cones. Those are, I believe, Holskarn Super Soft Wool. So I have those 2. I have a random piece of plastic that I found while I was dumping stuff out. So I'm not sure what I'm going to make with that. But yeah, that is what everything looks like. So I will have to I'm going to have to go through as I actually catalog these and look in more detail as to how long I've had things and why I haven't used them. But looking at this high level, I can kind of put together a couple of reasons why I purchase things and then maybe why things aren't being used. So looking at the array here, there's basically like 2 big reasons why I buy yarn, and I don't think these are going to come as a surprise to anybody who works with fiber, but the first one is some kind of like I'm inspired. So I'm at a yarn festival or I'm traveling and there's a skein of yarn or something that reminds me of that place, that reminds me of this moment, this experience, this joy I'm feeling. And so I purchase a single skein. This one from Loop is like my most recent example of that. I went to Philadelphia for a wedding and I got to check out this yarn store, and they had such beautiful yarns that I knew I wanted to bring something home with me to kind of have a lasting memento from the trip. So those are one type of purchase. Another one, this is Bar a Tricot, and I got this when I went to Montreal last year. And so, yeah, so it was, it's hand dyed in Quebec. So it reminds me of my trip and my journey. And, my dream is to like use it in a project. And then every time I wear that item, I will always remember it. The second big category is like, I got a bargain. There was a deal. I got a deal and I couldn't pass it up. So these Icelandic wools, for example, this Solitude wool Icelandic, I have I think 5 skeins total. Let me see if I can pick them all up. Yeah, I have these 5 skeins in like these different colors. And I bought these because I went to a yard sale and there was a woman who had a bunch of yarn she was selling. And I got these for like, I don't know, $5 a piece or something. And on the label itself, the retail price is $29. And it's worth it because this is a really lovely hand-dyed Icelandic yarn. And so there are other examples. There's definitely like more commercial yarns that are in here that fall into that category. But in general, if I get a bargain, if there's a deal, if I think I'm getting a discount, it's very hard for me to say no to yarn. Now for the reasons why I don't think I'm using things based on what I'm seeing here. I think the 2 categories there are, I have like a weird amount. So like there's some yarns that I have like 1 skein of, and I'm not always in the mood to make like a hat or gloves. I think I need more inspiration for what I can do with a single skein of yarn that gets me excited about using it. And then I think the other big thing is colors. So for example, this is a really nice yarn I got. It's from a brand called Tidal Yarns. And it's this really nice, like, kind of like cranberry or like, like maybe like a cranberry or like a light soft wine kind of color. And in the skein, it's beautiful. I love what it looks like, but if I'm honest, this is not a color that I wear. It's not a color that inspires me to actually knit with. And so I bought this probably like 2 years ago when I went to the Outer Banks. And I haven't used it because every time I see it, I'm like, I don't want to make something with it. So I think I need to think of ways that I can use yarn that falls outside of kind of my traditional idea of like, what can I make for myself? So maybe I need to start prioritizing some gift knits. Maybe I need to find people in my life who know how to take care of wool garments, but also like the colors that I have. I know like my mom and my aunt and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, things like that. They're definitely people that would appreciate things. So maybe I need to kind of share what I have and see if they're interested in anything. And then I think the other thing is I need to start looking at ways to use yarn for housewares. So good example of that is this. This is Universal Yarn Deluxe Worsted, and it's this, don't know how I would describe this blue, but it's like a little bit like of a muted blue. I don't think it has a 1, 2, 2, 6, 7. But it's not a color I'm drawn to in terms of wear. But if you look behind me, it like almost perfectly matches my pillows. So there's probably a way that I can use this single skein of yarn and pair it with like white yarn or something like that to create a pillow or something for this room that will allow me to use it, but not make me feel like I have to like wear something I'm not interested in wearing. So yeah, I will go ahead and get to my spreadsheet. I will get everything accounted for, and then once I have tallied everything up, I will come back and I will let you know where we stand. Okay, so I just realized that I had forgotten to include these. I wanted to include these yarns in my totals as well. These are all Lion Brand Respun, which is a 100% recycled polyester. I purchased this a couple years ago with the intention of using it for charity knits. I try to knit a couple of hats and other accessories for charity every year. And I don't know, I was really ambitious. I thought I would go through all of this yarn, but I still have quite a bit left. And so even though some of these are partial skeins, I want to include them in my totals because I want to try to use up this stash in order to create some more charity pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that these are all weighed, and I'll add these totals to my spreadsheet. All right, so I'm at my desk and I'm looking at the spreadsheet. I moved to my desk because I have a bigger monitor, and so it's just easier to see what's going on. But I have calculated all of my yarn totals and I have the grand reveal of how much yarn I have. All right, I have, in terms of yards, 33,477 yards of yarn. That is the equivalent of 100,431 feet. So I looked up some comparisons to get a sense of what that means. My yarn is as tall as 3.5 Mount Everests. I live in the DC area in the United States, and so one of our most famous tall landmarks is the Washington Monument. My yarn is as tall as 180 Washington monuments, or it's about as tall as 550 giraffes. So yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of yarn. In terms of weight, I have 8,403 grams, which is 8.4 kilograms, which is about like 19.5 pounds or almost 20 pounds of yarn, which feels like a lot. Like maybe it's not a lot, but maybe I don't know. When I was growing up, I had a big cat. I had a Maine Coon. He was a big cat and he weighed like 20 pounds. And so I remember that's what I think about when I see that number. And I'm like, wow, that feels heavy for something that when you hold it individually feels very light. So what I did was I found a reference for about how much yarn you need for different weights to do different kinds of projects. And then I took how much yarn I had in each of these categories and estimated out how many items I could make, given kind of the estimates, the rough estimates there. So I don't have any sport weight. I have no sport weight in my stash, which doesn't surprise me. I almost never knit with sport weight. But I have 5,098 yards of worsted weight yarn, which would be about 4 sweaters or 25 hats. I have 5,332 yards of DK, which would be about 3.5 sweaters or slightly less than 23 hats. I have only 502 yards of Aran weight, which again, it's not a weight I normally knit at, so that makes sense. And that's enough to make just a little bit less than 2 hats, so that doesn't feel too overwhelming there. I have 66,635 yards of fingering weight yarn. That is enough to make 22 sweaters or 166 pairs of socks. I'm a little surprised. I didn't think I liked fingering that much, but I guess it makes sense because I think a lot of times if I'm purchasing at like a yarn festival or something, it's the most economic because you can do a lot with one skein of fingering weight yarn, and you only need one skein of it. So, but I think I need to buckle down and find some fingering weight projects. And I guess you can also always hold it double for heavier gauge, something like a worsted weight. But yeah, I was a little surprised by how big that number was. And the last category is lace. It's all mohair for me. That is 21,397 yards. For this, I measured it out, assuming I would hold it double with like a fingering or something else, because I don't really knit mohair by itself, but I can make 14 sweaters with mohair plus something else. So I have a lot of yarn on hand to make a lot of garments. I'm trying not to put any like judgment on these numbers, right? Like it just is what it is. This is the yarn I've collected, and the only thing I can do is like make changes in my purchasing so that I don't end up with this number again. So in terms of goals, I don't know if I have a time frame yet, because I think I need a better sense of how much yarn I'm actually using on a regular basis. But once I have that, I will figure out kind of like what's a reasonable time frame. I do have a number in mind. So people use different methods for coming up with like a goal number. Sometimes people use the yarn weight. I think for me, I'm going to use the total yardage. And I think the number I want to arrive at is a 10,000 yard stash down. The reason for that is 10,000 is about a third of what I have so far. So that feels like a very big goal, but also something that feels more achievable than like getting to 0 or something like that. So yeah, so I think what I'm gonna do is call this like a 10,000 yard stash down. I don't know what the timeline is yet because I need a better sense of how much yarn I'm going through in a month. Once I have kind of those numbers, then I can say, well, in 6 months, I want it to be this much, and then I can figure out about how long 10,000 yards might take me and set that as a goal. I imagine this number will also fluctuate a little bit because I'm not going on like a yarn buying ban. If I'm traveling and I find a beautiful yarn, if I'm lucky enough to go to a yarn festival and I find something, I'm certainly going to purchase it. I'm going to be very mindful and make sure that it fits kind of categories of yarn weights and yarn styles that I'm looking for. But I'm going to go ahead. I will allow myself to purchase things. So this number may go up. This also isn't including any yarn that's part of a project that's in progress. And so if I finish a project and there's a whole skein of yarn, that's going to have to go back in the stash and I'm going to have to figure out something to do with it. So This number may go up a bit before it goes down, but as long as it goes down in the end, that's all we're looking for. I probably won't have I'm not gonna go ahead and make defined plans for each of these yarns because I know I'm not gonna stick to it. There's no way that I'm gonna be able to stick to something like that. But what I will do is, now that I have it and I know sort of how much of each category I have, I can go through my Ravelry favorites and put together a bundle that's just stash inspo. So for example, I think I have 4 sweaters quantity worth of worsted weight yarn. So I should find at least 6 to 8 of my favorites and add them to that bundle so that when it gets cold or when I'm feeling like casting on a worsted weight project, I have this sort of curated set of items I can look at that already fit all the requirements I need, so that I can just go ahead and get knitting and I don't have to get too bogged down with the choices of picking a pattern. For colors that I don't think I'm gonna wear, I think I need to figure out, one, if I can make gift knits for people. So are there people in my life that like those colors that I could make them something? Or I think I have some that I wouldn't wanna wear, but I might use in a bag, or I might do in a houseware, like a pillow or something. So that is my stash, where it is, where I hope it will get to. And if you like this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you want to keep track of how I'm doing on my yarn stash project, please go ahead and subscribe. I promise I will give you updates as I go so we can kind of see how things are going and how successful I am. I am curious to know more about how you manage your yarn stash. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by it? Do you get a lot of joy just at seeing what you have? Do you have any strategies for when you want to work through your stash? If so, please, leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear from you and get ideas about the things that you do. So that's all I have for today. I got to get started on this stash, and I will see you next time.